Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So the U.S. Supreme Court heard argument this morning in possibly the most important free speech case of recent decades. So the case is Murthy versus Missouri, which started out as Missouri versus Biden. And you'll remember that this case outflowed from the Twitter files and Elon Musk taking over Twitter, now known as X, and all of the discovery of how government collaborated with social media platforms to censor what they termed as misinformation or disinformation during the COVID pandemic. Now, this case is incredibly important for free speech because it stands for the proposition of how much influence government can have over social media companies and actually collaborate with them and use them as agents to restrict protected speech from dissidents or citizens who simply want to voice other opinions than what the government wants to designate as the mainstream narrative or quote unquote truth. So this is what former Attorney General of Missouri, now sitting Senator Mike Schmidt, had to say about this case.
In this building, the Supreme Court building right behind me, tomorrow, the Supreme Court's going to hear the most important free speech case in the history of our country, Missouri versus Biden. When I was Attorney General, I filed the lawsuit. I wish I was arguing it, but I got a different job now. But we uncovered in that lawsuit a vast censorship enterprise, an effort by big government, the federal government, its agencies, cooperating, coordinating, colluding with big tech, some of the biggest companies in the history of the world, to suppress millions of voices on social media. The online town square should be open. People should be able to express their point of view. That's what the lower court decided. I hope the Supreme Court sees it the same way, to protect everybody, no matter your political opinion, your political stripe, their ability to speak their mind.
So I listened to the arguments this morning, and a lot of it was this question of standing, whether or not the people who were suppressed and silenced on social media had an Article 3 case or controversy to actually bring in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And we remember, of course, from the 2020 election and other things, that standing can be used by the court, whether that's the Supreme Court or the trial court, to not reach the merits of the case, to just say, well, these particular plaintiffs don't actually have a case or controversy. They weren't harmed, or that harm is not traceable to the person that they're suing, or there is no what the law calls redressability. There's nothing for the government in the court system to actually do to redress the grievance that's being brought in front of the court. So a lot of the argument focused on that. But one of the things that I found very interesting was that a lot of the argument, when we're talking about the merit of the case, if the court does in fact reach the merit to say how much can the government term as misinformation and collude with big tech platforms and these social media platforms to silence dissenting opinions, a lot of this really didn't hit on the question of prior restraint. That's the legal doctrine that suggests that the government cannot censor speech prior to the speech actually being addressed or given. This is exactly what the government is doing when it is telling big tech to block accounts or restrict or suspend accounts that they deem are putting out what they call misinformation. There was basically a presumption in the oral arguments that the misinformation or disinformation that the government had surrounding the COVID pandemic from all of these doctors who were trying to put out other information than what the government wanted and the Biden administration wanted surrounding the vaccine, surrounding COVID itself, was in fact truthful. And so interestingly, this whole conversation about the so-called harm to the public, when you have these viewpoints that the government wants to combat, a lot of this didn't focus around the question of prior restraint. And so Justice Jackson actually asked one of the attorneys who was arguing on behalf of the state of Missouri, saying that censorship like this should not be a function of the government, saying, well, how come the government shouldn't be able to combat these types of harms? There was a presumption in the argument that harm had occurred merely by these doctors and other people on social media expressing their opinion that was different from what the government wanted the mainstream to believe. And so this is the most important free speech case, I think, because this all boils down to a central question. Can the government determine what is or is not truth? Can the government basically act as a ministry of truth and in its sole discretion determine what is misinformation or disinformation, and then shield the general public in a public forum or public square like social media? Say, we don't want anyone putting out their opinions that are contrary to what the government believes is truthful and therefore is harmful to the American public. I hope that the Supreme Court addresses that question. Justice Thomas also had a really interesting constitutional argument and question for the Solicitor General that was arguing on behalf of the Biden administration. Listen to this.
Do we just, so I understand your argument, do we normally apply state action doctrine in cases involving the government or private parties?
Both, I think. In some state action cases, you're asking someone is suing a private party and alleging that that private party is bound by the contours of the First Amendment or other constitutional provisions because they're state actors. You see some suits like that look like this, suits against the platforms, suits against Stanford University, which is referenced in Tamika's brief here. But you also see suits against the government based on conduct by private parties. That was the case in Blum, and that's the theory that respondents are pursuing.
Are there any First Amendment cases?
Any First Amendment cases, I'm sorry.
Employing state action doctrine.
And suing the government. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one.
So they're usually things like Medicare or government contracts or relationships like that.
Yeah, and I think what that gets at is that it's very unusual, and we don't think it's possible for the government through speech alone to transform private speakers into state actors. We think these cases usually are and ought to be viewed through the banned in books type framework, where there's a problem if the government is engaged in coercion, but if it stays on the persuasion side of the line and all we're talking about is government speech, then there's no state action and there's also no First Amendment problem.
One final question. You continue to refer to government speech. Just for my edification, what's the constitutional basis for government speech?
Yeah, so the court has said, I think that the government is entitled to speak for itself. It's not a right that comes from the First Amendment. It's a feature of our constitutional democracy. As the court has said, the government couldn't function if it couldn't express points of view. In Walker, the court explained, for example, that the government has to be able to run a vaccination campaign at times of public health crisis. I think that's a major part of what was going on here. So the court hasn't located it in a specific constitutional provision. It's just part of democratic governance.
That's a really fascinating response. So there is nothing in the Constitution, of course, that gives the government any sort of protected rights. They are only given limited powers in the U.S. Constitution. And one of those, of course, is not protected speech. So we have to take a hard break here, but we'll be right back with our panel to discuss more about this important free speech case on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at NewtGingrichSilvercoin.com. That's NewtGingrichSilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to NewtGingrichSilvercoin.com now. We're still talking about Murthy versus Missouri, which was the free speech case that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court for oral argument this morning. So let's bring in our panel of legal eagles, Ron Coleman, who is part of the Dillon Law Group and also hosts the podcast, The Coleman Nation, and also Mike Donnelly, who is a constitutional law professor. And so, gentlemen, you are both some of my favorite legal scholars. So I'm really grateful to have you for what I think is the most important free speech case going up to the Supreme Court, probably in recent memory. So, Ron, let's start with you. Why is this so important in terms of what the court's opinion may allow for the government or free speech in general?
The speech challenge of our time is the convergence of technology, corporations, and government. It's not the old-fashioned postmaster going through the mail looking for dirty pictures. It is the government infiltrating, both explicitly and in other ways, and involving itself with and putting pressure on, or even affirmatively cooperating with as a partner, social media platforms in order to control speech. There's nothing bigger than that. We won't be having this conversation if the Supreme Court rules doesn't affirm this decision.
So let's go to Mike Donnelly then on this issue of government cooperation with social media platforms, because as we all know, I mean, Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter, these are private companies, but does the analysis change when they basically become agents of the government?
It absolutely changes, Jenna, 100%. You and I have had this conversation before, and we argued over this. As I remember years ago, you asked me, what about this? I said, well, Facebook's a private company, can do what it wants. But when the government gets involved, that changes the equation 100%. There is nothing more dangerous to our country than the government trying to control the speech of American citizens. Benjamin Franklin, a long time ago, recognized that if you want to take over this country, if you want to undermine the liberty of this country, he said you first have to undermine freedom of speech. And this is not a new issue. You remember the Alien and Sedition Acts, where the Sedition Acts were about trying to control the speech of individuals and of newspapers to not criticize the government. The Supreme Court never actually struck down the Sedition Act. It just expired. Well, I hope that the Supreme Court will take the opportunity here to drive a stake into the heart of this idea that government can collude and conspire with private organizations and control the speech of individuals. So thank you for asking that question, Jenna. It absolutely changes, and I'm hopeful that this will be, if not a unanimous decision, it should be a very strong majority decision. I hope. The answer to me is very obvious.
Yeah, the answer, I think, to anyone who values freedom and liberty is obvious. But Justice Alito actually commented on exactly what you were talking about, Mike Donnelly, with respect to newspapers, and suggesting that if we weren't talking about social media, then we wouldn't be addressing this at all with newspapers. And we have that cut. So let's play this from Justice Alito.
Exchanged between the White House and other federal officials, and Facebook in particular, but also some of the other platforms. And I see that the White House and federal officials are repeatedly saying that Facebook and the federal government should be partners. We're on the same team. Officials are demanding answers. I want an answer. I want it right away. When they're unhappy, they curse them out. There are regular meetings. There is constant pestering of Facebook and some of the other platforms, and they want to have regular meetings, and they suggest, they suggest rules that should be applied, and why don't you tell us everything that you're going to do so we can help you and we can look it over. And I thought, wow, I cannot imagine federal officials taking that approach to the print media, our representatives over there. If you did that to them, what do you think the reaction would be? And so I thought, the only reason why.
All right. So Ron Coleman, is he right?
Of course he's right. He's absolutely right. He's one of the few people that look, Justice Alito wrote the opinion in McCullough versus Tam, which I'm a little partial to. he absolutely gets it on free speech. I wish I could be as confident as everyone in the room right now about the strength of the majority on this opinion. I do think it will be affirmed, but there, he seems to have actually paid some attention to the fact. Some of the justices here seem to be utterly unaware of what went on in this case and what the record demonstrates. The extent of direct coercion, the insistence that these platforms get with the program coming from the White House. Oh, is it someone not actually an assistant to the president, but only 2 steps further down from this is the White House. Jenna, you know how things operate in the White House.
Yeah, unfortunately, perhaps. But, Mike Donnelly, this is a point that Justice Jackson raised that was presumptively assuming that there was harm to the American public by social media platforms being allowed to air various viewpoints on COVID, on COVID remedies. And so, let's remember all of this took place in the context of the government trying to coerce the COVID vaccine. And so, one of the things that I found fascinating about her line of questioning was that they're presumed that this was harmful to the American public to hear a different point of view.
I cannot find that more troubling to hear someone sitting in the Supreme Court say something like that. Thank you very much, Justice Jackson. We know what a man is and a woman is. We know how to figure out whether speech is accurate or not. We can figure that out. We don't need you or Big Brother telling us what kind of speech we can listen to or what kind of speech we shouldn't listen to. Jenna, a question I have is, what enterprising prosecutor is going to look at 18 U.S.C. 371 and bring some questions about how these
we got there, but let's hold over the Legal Eagle panel to the next segment because there's so much more I want to dissect with both of you. We'll be right back.
Stacey Washington Now, your go-to for a fresh, informed take on the political world. Stacey tackles today's crucial issues with a dynamic blend of news, opinion, and analysis. Don't miss Stacey Washington Now, weekdays at 5 p.m. Eastern on SNC.
Have you heard? Jenna Ellis Tonight is on 5 nights a week. Count on Jenna Ellis for insightful commentary on the day's biggest stories.
We can still consistently be conservatives.
Jenna Ellis Tonight, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern on Salem News Channel.
As you know, my friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of their life. He didn't stop by simply creating the best pillow. Mike created the Giza Dream bed sheets. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike found the world's best cotton. It is ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's Giza sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. The Giza Dream Sheets come in a variety of sizes and colors. Mike's latest incredible deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets. You will also receive a set for as low as $29.98. So go to MyPillow.com, click on the radio podcast square, and use the promo code Jenna. There you will find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, which I have and I love, the MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and now even flannel sheets and so much more. We definitely need flannel sheets for as crazy as all of this weather has been lately. So go to MyPillow.com and make sure you use the promo code Jenna or call 1-800-564-8475. That's 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna. Welcome back. We are still talking about the very important free speech case that was argued at the U.S. Supreme Court earlier today. Let's bring back in our Legal Eagle panel of Ron Coleman with the Dillon Group and Mike Donnelly, who's a constitutional law professor. And I hate hard breaks on television because, Mike, you were talking right before the break about some enterprising prosecutor that, may be looking at some statutes in order to prosecute. So go ahead and finish that thought.
Well, I was just saying, Jenna, 18 U.S.C. 371 addresses the issue of impugning or injuring the integrity of the government, as well as using an instrumentality of the government to defraud the U.S. government. And I think, some people are paying attention to this case because that's what they're using to go after President Trump. And so I don't see the difference here. Maybe Ron can tell me what the difference is, or maybe you can see a difference. But these federal officials colluding and conspiring with Facebook to use their power to violate the First Amendment rights of the American people seems to be a problem.
Well, it's not undermining democracy, I mean, so obviously it's not President Trump, it's the Democrats. That's really the difference. But go ahead, Ron.
Well, I mean, one of the problems is that almost every justice was prepared to operate from in his or her hypotheticals in this framework of, well, what if it's actually factually incorrect information? And as Professor Donnelly just observed, the government doesn't have a monopoly on what is factual information. In fact, it's been damned wrong in a damned big way very recently about a lot of things. And during oral argument, we heard several times about foreign powers, foreign interference. The government made that whole thing up. And here we are saying, well, what if the FBI really determined if there was election interference? They didn't put it quite in this way, that there was Russian election interference. Wouldn't we want the platforms to know? We'd want the platforms to know that the government thinks that. We'd also want people to be able to demonstrate that that's not true, or that they'd have reason to believe it's not true, or reason to question a claim. Justice Jackson says, I'm really concerned about the idea that your thinking, Mr. Fletcher, would hamstring the government's ability to be heard in its most important moments. What the First Amendment does. We decide what's important.
Right. Well, and this gentleman gets into two questions that I had listening to the oral argument. So, Michael, I'll address this to you. I mean, first, it was the question by Justice Thomas in the very beginning to the Solicitor General, and I alluded to this in the monologue earlier, that he actually asked, where does the government get the right to constitutionally protected speech in the text? And the Solicitor General had to concede that, no, that's nowhere in the text. I mean, and I kind of grew up in the understanding of originalism in the Constitution, that government doesn't have rights. They have a limited specific powers, and they have every opportunity to speak, but they can't censor the speech and the content of private citizens who want to go out and voice their viewpoint, which gets to my second question, is nobody really brought up this whole idea of prior restraint. Isn't that basically what the government is trying to do by suspending various accounts of individuals that they think are going to put out more what they have deemed misinformation or disinformation? And so by telling these social media platforms, you have to suspend their accounts, that's a form of prior restraint. And I thought this is a long settled issue that the government can't do that.
It is a long settled issue that is prior restraint. And that's why I'm confident that this is going to be a strong decision, 7-2, 6-3 at least, I would think. I mean, I just have a hard time seeing the other justices going along with this. This is, as Mr. Coleman said, one of the most important, if not the most important question that we've got to resolve. Again, it will resolve the question of the Sedition Acts back at the very beginning of the founding of the country. Here's my advice to the government. If you want to say something, say it. Say it like everybody else says it. You can make a post on Facebook. You can make a comment on Facebook. You have websites. Use your websites. If you want to put your information out there, you put your information out there. We'll put our information out there, and then we'll see actually who ends up having the truth. And I think we know the American people can figure out truth from falsehood, even in spite of the best efforts of those who would like to lead us.
Yeah, and Ron, this was getting into the conversation that we just had about Justice Jackson, because she actually addressed that specifically by saying, well, we know that it's not enough sometimes for the government to just say, hey, kids, this is harmful, don't do it. So she's actually wanting intentionally to suppress the viewpoints of anyone who goes against the government's narrative. And specifically, she was talking about the whole COVID vaccine issue, which has now been thoroughly debunked, that the vaccine was even, remotely helpful in the ways that the government was initially alleging. And so that's very concerning that a sitting justice is proffering that kind of rationale.
We heard it, though. We heard it from Justice Sotomayor on previous oral arguments. There has been a very distressing growth of this doctrine of government speech as being something that ought to be weighed with something other than incidental benefit. Yes, it is true, as the Solicitor General said, that in order for the government to govern, it must be able to communicate. But that doesn't come close to weighing against First Amendment rights of American citizens. Period. That's it.
Yeah, and nobody is suggesting that the government can't speak here, like Mike was just saying. I mean, the government has, in fact, some of the largest social media accounts. I mean, a lot of people follow the White House. They have the whole mainstream media that are parroting everything that the press secretary is saying. So nobody is talking about foreclosing government's speech here. That's not even a question before the court. So, Mike, in just the last 2 minutes we have here, let's get to the one issue about standing, because this has seemed to be kind of the off-ramp that that the court has used when they really don't want to address the merits. And that was a huge part of the argument today, that the Solicitor General was suggesting that because it was these social media tech giants that were actually doing the ones suspending the accounts or taking down posts, that there was no traceability back to the government, even though clearly they had these conversations and they were the ones that were colluding with big tech. He's saying, oh, no, it's not traceable, so there's no redressability here.
Mendacious sophistry. Look it up. No, I don't think so. Clearly, there's collusion. There's not even collusion. There's conspiracy, I would say. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's not easy to draw the line between 18 U.S.C. 371 and what happened here. I mean, if you can go after President Trump, you can go after Facebook and these people who did this. Why not? Clearly, there was the government, actively involved in doing this, and I don't see a standing issue. Maybe Ron can point that out a little bit better, but I don't see it. This is very troubling. This is the most important, if not one of the most, if not the most, one of the most important rights we have in America, the ability to speak freely among ourselves, 100%. To figure out what's
and we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Really appreciate it so much. And I hope that the Supreme Court does the right thing and actually just follows the Constitution. So Ron Coleman, Mike Donnelly, thanks so much for joining me on the Legal Eagle panel. We'll be right back. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at NewtGingrichSilvercoin.com. That's NewtGingrichSilvercoin.com, and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to NewtGingrichSilvercoin.com now. Well, the mainstream media has been in a tizzy over remarks that former President Trump made at his Saturday rally in Ohio, because they are taking the term bloodbath completely out of context and wanting to hyper-focus on that term and make everybody who likes Trump or is remotely a conservative seem like a right-wing extremist and calling for violence. This is what the left does best. They take something totally out of context, they hyper-focus on just a term. They want to suggest that every person who supports Trump or is a Christian or a conservative is somehow an extremist and calling for violence, instead of actually talking about the merit of President Trump's comments. So listen for yourself and see what you think.
Mexico has taken, over a period of 30 years, 34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country. Think of it. Went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now And you think you're going to get that? You're going to not hire Americans and you're going to sell the cars to us? No, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line. And you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories. A friend of mine.
So in the context of automobile manufacturing, but of course that was completely lost on the mainstream media. This is what one mainstream media outlet had to say, and spinning the context, of course.
Bruce in for Lindsay Davis. We begin tonight with the race for the White House and former President Trump's campaign now on the defensive after his fiery rhetoric at a rally in Dayton, Ohio on Saturday night. Trump warning while discussing the economy that there would be a, quote, bloodbath if he is not reelected in November. This after the former president kicked off the event by paying tribute to those who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. President Biden's campaign swiftly denouncing those comments as threats of political violence.
I don't think that my eyes have anywhere further back in my head to roll at the mainstream media, but they're total hypocrites because the mainstream media, when they want to, actually use the term bloodbath themselves. And even recently, watch this.
In a move that could haunt the GOP, Donald Trump's allies have now ordered mass layoffs at the Republican National Committee. It comes just days after Trump's allies, including his daughter-in-law, took command of the RNC. Headlines calling it a, quote, bloodbath and a, quote, mob-like takeover, with more than 60 officials, including senior staff members, laid off or asked to resign.
So Kevin McCullough is the host of That Kevin Show, and he joins me out. So Kevin, Politico apparently can use the term bloodbath, but Donald Trump, of course, can't. That's always a call for violence. I mean, could the Democrats be more transparently hypocritical?
I want to just point out that both the ABC World News Tonight clip that you just played and Katie Fang over on MSNBC, both were inherently dishonest in their approach to even the stories that they were reporting on. Katie Fang's being somewhat old, and the ABC World News Tonight story focusing on Trump's comments. And of course, they're doing this to try to frame Trump's rhetoric as some sort of violence, and it's kind of like a continuation of the January 6th stuff. They're gonna try to harp on this aspect of who he is. But if you just do about a half second worth of due diligence, if you're anyone in the media, if you're anyone who even pretends to be a journalist, do a half second worth of research and search the term Obama, quote, bloodbath, or Biden, quote, bloodbath, and see how many times not just press outlets have used the term, but actual candidates talking about foreboding situations if their prediction on whatever topic of the day doesn't come true. Jenna, the hypocrisy is beyond hysterical here, and it's really gotten into an area that I feel like is rather dangerous for the American people. You have press outlets that are purporting to be on some level telling facts that are just no longer interested in facts at all. And if we lose the ability to even have any remote amount of truth in the rhetoric that's being put out by the press, that's a very scary place to be.
It really is, Kevin, because you're right. If they took a half a second to research this at all, they would see the truth. But I think that's the point, is that they're not doing their research. They are simply drawing a conclusion that they want to present to the American people and selling it as truthful when clearly it's contorted and perverted in a lot of instances. But this begs the question, I think, for the conservative response, because the mainstream media is so good at drawing our attention away from what Trump was actually speaking about, which was his great economy. And Biden's economy is terrible. And so everybody is talking now about the bloodbath comment and defending Trump instead of saying, mainstream media, kick rocks, let's talk about the economy. Why aren't we better at doing that?
Well, what I love about Trump's approach here is that he had about 4 different audiences that comment was delivered to. And most significantly, of all of the audiences that were hearing it, the ones on TV, the ones in attendance, the ones that were in the press, and President Xi himself. And this is a kind of a footnote about Trump-style negotiation, and that is
that he's going to tell you what he's going to do way in advance of doing it, and then he's going to keep trying to do it until it gets done. And when he gets it done, he's going to tell you why he did what he did because he promised he would do it. This is not anybody that's watching this understands that he's already beginning the negotiations for how China is going to play differently after he becomes president. And it was salvos like that in Dayton, Ohio this weekend that did it. But it's also a shot across the bow because auto unions have been bleeding in recent years. And the Biden team, good old Scranton Joe was the guy that was going to bring, wonderful, calm peace to the union household that they had not had really for quite some time until Trump started bringing those jobs back. This is so masterful in terms of what Trump's doing. And you're right. The ability for the press to go, oh, he said bloodbath, we got to get rid of that. And they immediately go on the attack for what they think is going to be the most extreme version. And they're not remembering, Jenna, that there's places like Salem News Channel, that there's places like the internet where we fact check this stuff almost instantaneously. And there's so many more voices in the conversation now, and people don't have to trust Katie Fang or World News Tonight.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness we have the same Salem News Channel. But I think that our editors, Kevin, are going to have to cancel you for using the term bleeding because, of course, Katie Fang's not going to like that one. So we'll see how that plays out. Just kidding. Definitely watch that Kevin show. And we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, speaking of justice in other forums, there is now a question of whether trans-identified individuals are trying to get more leniency from the court by essentially lying. This post and this headline coming from the Post Millennial, trans killer likely lied to judge at sentencing after getting a sweetheart plea deal from Portland DA Mike Schmidt. Joining me now is Andy Ngo, who is a senior editor at the Post Millennial and is the one who has been following this story. So, Andy, I don't think that a lot of viewers actually have been following this. So give us kind of the background and why this is such a big issue that these trans-identified individuals are basically asking for leniency in front of the court just based on their sexual identity.
So in April of 2023, there was a homicide in Portland. Portland has experienced, like many American cities, a surge in violent criminality from 2020 onward as a result of the BLM Antifa panic and movement. This homicide stood out to me because initially no place had looked into the suspect's background. I did some digging and found out that the murder suspect is a trans person. So some details. What had happened is that in April 2023, a trans person wearing a tiara and a dress got into a cab in Portland, and several minutes into the ride had plunged a blade into the neck of the driver. His name is Reese McDowell-Lahan, and he died in the vehicle. I spoke with the source for my reporting last year who had watched the video and described it as the most graphic and brutal video that this individual had ever seen. So days before, the murder suspect, who had come from another part of Oregon to Portland, had allegedly threatened other people with a knife and was arrested and let go. And that's a pattern you'll see quite often, and then went on to allegedly murder. Fast forward to February of this year. The suspect, the name is Moses Lopez, was given a sweetheart plea deal by District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Now, Mike Schmidt came into office during the height of the BLM Antifa riots in his probably most infamous legacy, in addition to the surge of violence under his leadership, is that he decriminalized most riot-related crimes as Portland was burning night after night after night. Well, his office gave a sweetheart deal where the murder charge was allowed to be pleaded down to a manslaughter charge. And what's interesting is that ahead of sentencing, the manslaughter suspect said that they were having essentially a medical emergency and had called 911 for help, didn't receive any help, said that they refused to apologize for the lack of help that they desperately needed. That's the quote at the time. And so this was ahead of sentencing, and then the judge sentenced this manslaughter convict now to 22 years. But local media in Portland, KATU, and kudos to them, did some public records digging and acquired the 911 phone call made by the killer immediately after the killing, and it completely contradicted the statements made ahead of sentencing. This person made no pleas for help for 911 to come, did not say anything about having a medical, psychological emergency. And I think the fact that the trans identity is important in here is just because we see in many, many cases, not just this one, of murder suspects, homicide suspects, killers who have a transgender identity, and somehow that bringing that in during the process of ahead of the sentence, talking about, in part, it can be because they don't want to be housed in a male prison facility, and or that they want more lenient, more lenient sentence.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me, Andy, and I so appreciate your reporting on this. And for people who want to support Andy's work, you can go to his Substack page on his social media and support independent journalism. And I'm a huge advocate of that, so I want to put that out there. But for these trans-identified individuals, I mean, it seems like the entire queer theory agenda is pushing on one hand to normalize this and say, this is a great thing that all these people can be out as who they are, and this isn't a mental illness. And yet, when they commit these types of atrocities and they're in front of the court, they're looking at this almost like a mental health or mental competency defense. It seems like you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, and so there's some additional context to this homicide in that the homicide happened and other acts of violence have happened in America by non-binary and or trans suspects and killers. It's that it takes place in this context where activists and Democrat politicians are normalizing language around political violence for trans people, like encouraging it. For example, they will wear shirts that say "protect trans kids," and there's an image of a knife. And there's been politicians in different Democrat cities who have worn that, and it's quite chilling considering there have been trans killers who have used knives to kill people, such as in this case. But yeah, there's this wider context of Trans Day of Vengeance, people who justify trans mass killers, even trans people, a trans shooter who killed children in Nashville. There was a memorial held for that killer by trans activists. So yeah, there's a deeper story behind just individual anecdotes of violence. It's taking place in the context of language around the normalization and legitimization of violence when it comes to certain groups that leftists are sympathetic to or supportive of.
Yeah, and Andy, I really hope that the court here is going to take into consideration whether this individual in the Portland case ended up lying to the court and wanting to engender that type of sympathy and to use the trans status as some sort of benefit. But this presents a wider question, I think, of what does justice require? I mean, it shouldn't matter whether it's a male, a female, trans-identified, whatever. Justice should be justice, and this is why we could have a whole conversation on hate crimes. But that's all the time that we have here tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight. You can always reach me and my team at Jenna@SalemNewsChannel.com.